This is Crazy HOA Moments. And yes, the tow truck really showed up. The tow operator asked me if I lived here, and Karen screamed that he should not talk to violators. I am standing on the curb in front of my house in Miami, Florida, watching a wheel lift arm inch toward my tire, and Betty Wilson is pointing at my car like it is a biohazard. I work as an accountant, I keep a clean ledger and receipts, and I have never been late on a single bill in my life. Betty does not care. She is the rules interpretation chair for the Lakeview Crest Village Association, and she claims she wrote the covenants herself. The tow truck driver looks at me, then at her, then back at me. He shrugs. "I am here to stop people like you," Betty says, and her voice is loud enough that a neighbor watering the lawn pauses mid-spray to stare. I ask what I did wrong. Betty pulls a portable thermal printer from her jacket pocket and slaps a fresh notice onto my windshield. The paper is still warm. "I do not need your explanation, I need your payment," she says, and the driver hooks the chain under my front bumper. I try to explain that I parked in my own assigned spot, that my decal is current, that I did not block anything. Betty cuts me off. She says the HOA issued a new parking map 2 weeks ago, and everyone already got it. I tell her I never received a map. She smiles and says that is my problem, not hers. The driver lifts my front wheels off the ground. I ask him to wait. He says he is just doing his job. Betty steps closer and tells me I have 30 minutes to pay the tow yard or they will impound the car overnight. I ask how much. She says $200 up front plus daily storage. I pull out my phone to call the management company. Betty says they are closed for the weekend. I look at the notice on my windshield. It has no violation code, no rule citation, just a date stamp and a handwritten note that says unauthorized guest vehicle. I tell her this is my car. She says prove it. I show her my registration. She glances at it and says the HOA has discretion to tow any vehicle that does not comply with current standards. I ask what standards. She says the ones in the map. The driver chains my car to the lift. I try one more time to reason with him. He says he got a work order from the association and a tow authorization placard signed by Betty. He flashes it at me. No readable text, just a logo and a signature. Betty crosses her arms and says I can file a dispute on Monday if I want. I ask where. She says the management portal. I tell her I have never been denied access to the portal before. She says maybe I should check my email. I pull up my phone right there and log in. Access denied. I show her the screen. She shrugs and says it must be a system error. The neighbor with the hose turns off the water and walks closer. He asks what is happening. Betty tells him I am being towed for parking violations. He looks confused. He says he sees my car here every day. Betty says that is exactly the problem. She says I am hogging a guest spot. I tell the neighbor this is my assigned spot. Betty interrupts and says the new map reassigned my spot to guest overflow. I ask when. She says 2 weeks ago. I ask why I was not notified. She says I was. I ask for proof. She says the HOA sent an email blast. I check my inbox on the spot. Nothing. Betty says I probably marked it as spam. The neighbor looks uncomfortable and walks back to his lawn. The driver finishes securing my car. He gets back in the cab. I tell him I am calling the police. Betty laughs. She says go ahead, the HOA has legal authority to enforce parking rules. I dial anyway. The non-emergency line puts me on hold. Betty taps her watch and says the tow yard closes at 8. It is 7:30 now. I ask the driver where the yard is. He hands me a card with an address in Hialeah. I ask if I can just pay him now and take my car back. He says no, the authorization came from the HOA, so the HOA has to cancel it. I look at Betty. She smiles and says make it public. I love watching people get embarrassed. The truck pulls away. I hang up on hold and call my girlfriend. She is at work. I tell her what happened. She asks if I can get a ride to the tow yard. I say yes, but I do not know if they will release the car without HOA authorization. She says to go anyway and document everything. I agree. I go inside and grab my laptop, my packet of HOA records, and a small measuring-free diagram packet I keep for work. No readable text, just blueprints and site maps I printed for a client last month. I lock the door and walk to my neighbor 2 houses down. He drives for a rideshare company. I knock. He opens the door and I explain. He says he saw the whole thing from his window. He says Betty has been on a rampage lately. He offers to drive me. We get to the tow yard at 10 to 8. The gate is still open. I walk into the office. A woman behind bulletproof glass asks for my ticket. I show her the notice from my windshield. She types into her computer and says the vehicle is under HOA hold. I ask what that means. She says I need written authorization from the association to release it. I ask if I can pay the fee and get a receipt. She says I can pay, but the car stays until the hold is lifted. I ask how to lift the hold. She says contact the HOA. I tell her the HOA portal locked me out. She says that is not her problem. I pay $200 and get a receipt. The clerk hands me a card with the yard's number. She says I have 72 hours before they start charging storage. I ask what happens after that. She says the car goes to auction. I take the receipt and walk back to my neighbor's car. He drives me home. On the way, I call the management company emergency line. It goes to voicemail. I leave a message with my address, my account number, and a summary of what happened. I do not expect a call back until Monday. When I get home, I check my email again. Still nothing from the HOA. I log into the portal from my laptop. Access denied. I try resetting my password. The system says my account is under review pending compliance verification. I screenshot everything. I open my HOA folder and pull up the covenants. I search for parking rules. Section 12 covers vehicle standards. It says all vehicles must display a current decal and park in assigned spaces. It says guest vehicles must use designated guest parking. It says nothing about reassignments or new maps. I search for amendment notices. Nothing. I check my physical mail. No map. I check the recycling bin. No map. I call my girlfriend again. She gets home at midnight. She says we need to escalate this before Monday. I agree. She suggests calling a lawyer. I say I want to try the management company first because a lawyer will cost more than the tow fee. She says fine, but if they stonewall me, we go legal. I agree. Saturday morning, I wake up at 6 and drive my girlfriend's car to the HOA office. It is closed. The sign says office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I take a photo of the sign. I walk around the building. I see a bulletin board behind glass. I check for new notices. There is a flyer about pool resurfacing, a reminder about trash pickup, and a notice about the annual meeting next month. No parking map. I take photos of everything. I drive to Betty's house. I know where she lives because she is listed as a board contact in the directory. Her driveway has 2 cars and a golf cart. I knock on the door. No answer. I ring the bell. Still nothing. I see movement in the window. I knock again. The door opens. Betty is wearing the same pink baseball cap she had on yesterday. She looks annoyed. I tell her I need the HOA authorization to release my car. She says the office is closed. I say I know, but this is an emergency. She says it is not an emergency, it is a compliance issue. I ask for a copy of the parking map. She says it was emailed. I say I never got it. She says check spam. I pull up my phone and show her my spam folder. Empty. She says I must have deleted it. I ask if she has a physical copy. She says no. I ask if the management company has one. She says probably. I ask for their emergency number. She says she already gave it to me. I say no, she did not. She smiles and says I should have written it down. She closes the door. I stand there for a moment. My girlfriend calls. She asks where I am. I tell her. She says to leave before Betty calls the cops. I get in the car and drive to a Starbucks. I sit in the parking lot and start writing an email to the board. I address it to the public HOA email from the directory. I explain the situation. I attach the receipt, the notice photo, the portal screenshot, and the photos from the bulletin board. I CC my own email and my girlfriend's email for the record. I send it. I go home and wait. Sunday passes with no response. Monday morning, I call the management company at 9. A receptionist answers. I explain the situation. She puts me on hold. 5 minutes later, a property manager named Linda picks up. She says she got my voicemail and my email. She says she will look into it. I ask how long. She says by end of day. I ask if she can authorize the car release in the meantime. She says she needs to verify the violation first. I tell her there is no violation. She says she will call me back. At 2 in the afternoon, Linda calls back. She says the HOA parking committee issued a new map on the 15th of last month and sent it to all residents. I say I never got it. She says the email went out. I ask if she can forward me a copy. She says she does not have access to resident emails. I ask who does. She says the board secretary. I ask for the secretary's contact. She says she cannot give out board members' personal information. I ask how I am supposed to get the map. She says I can request it in writing. I ask how. She says send a records request to the HOA email. I tell her I already emailed the board. She says that is not a formal records request. I ask what counts as formal. She says certified mail with a check for copying fees. I ask how much. She says 50 cents per page plus a $30 processing fee. I ask how many pages. She says she does not know until they pull the file. I tell her this is insane. She says it is policy. I hang up and call my girlfriend. She is in a meeting. I text her. She texts back an hour later and says to file the records request and also file a complaint with the state. I look up the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. They oversee HOAs. I fill out an online complaint form. I attach all my documentation. I submit it. Tuesday morning, I go to the post office. I draft a formal records request. I ask for a copy of the new parking map, the email distribution list from the 15th, and any board minutes authorizing the map. I include a check for $50. I send it certified mail. The clerk gives me a tracking number. I go home and check my car status with the tow yard. Still under hold. I call Linda again. She says the board has not lifted the hold yet. I ask why. She says they are reviewing my dispute. I ask when they meet. She says the next board meeting is in 2 weeks. I tell her I cannot wait 2 weeks. She says I can request an emergency hearing. I ask how. She says email the board. I remind her I already did. She says send another one specifically requesting a hearing. I do it right there on the phone. She says she will forward it. Wednesday morning, I get a call from an unknown number. I answer. It is a vendor from a gate access company. He says the HOA sent him to verify my resident status. I ask why. He says it is a compliance check. I tell him I am a resident. He asks to see my ID and my deed. I ask who authorized this. He says Betty Wilson. I tell him to leave. He says he is just doing his job. I close the door and call Linda. She says the HOA has the right to verify occupancy. I tell her this feels like harassment. She says I can file a complaint with the board. I laugh. She does not. That afternoon, I get an email from the HOA. It says my records request is being processed and will take 30 business days. I reply and say Florida law requires a response in 10 days. No reply. I forward the email to my girlfriend. She says call a lawyer. I find a real estate attorney who offers a free consultation. I call. His paralegal schedules me for Friday morning. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA revenge stories. Thursday night, I am sitting on my couch going through my email chain with the management company when I hear a knock. I look through the peephole. It is Betty. I open the door. She is holding a clipboard and her portable thermal printer. She says the HOA needs to inspect my air conditioning unit for noise compliance. I tell her it is almost 9 at night. She says she is available now. I ask if she has a warrant. She says HOAs do not need warrants. I tell her to leave. She steps closer and says I am making this harder than it needs to be. I close the door. She knocks again. I do not answer. She slaps a notice on my door and leaves. I peel the notice off the door. It says failure to cooperate with inspection, $50 fine. I take a photo. I add it to my file. Friday morning, I meet with the attorney. His name is Paul. He reviews my documents. He says the HOA violated Florida statute by locking me out of the portal without notice, by towing my car without proper notification, and by delaying my records request beyond the legal window. He says I have grounds for a lawsuit. I ask how much. He says his retainer is $3,000. I tell him I want to try the hearing first. He says that is fine, but if I lose, I will need him. He gives me his card. I thank him and leave. Saturday morning, I get a call from Linda. She says the board agreed to an emergency hearing on Monday night at 7. I ask where. She says the clubhouse. I ask if I can bring a witness. She says I can bring whoever I want, but only residents can speak. I tell her I am bringing my girlfriend and the neighbor who drove me to the tow yard. She says fine. I spend the weekend preparing. I print out every email, every photo, every receipt. I organize them in a binder. I write a timeline. I rehearse my statement. My girlfriend helps me practice. She plays devil's advocate. She asks the questions I am afraid the board will ask. By Sunday night, I feel ready. Monday evening, I drive to the clubhouse. My girlfriend and my neighbor come with me. We get there at 6:45. The parking lot is full. I see Betty's car. I see 2 other board members' cars. I recognize them from the directory. We walk inside. The meeting room is set up with a long table at the front and rows of folding chairs. About 20 people are already seated. I recognize a few faces. Most are older residents. Betty is at the front table with 2 other board members. She sees me and smirks. At 7, the board president calls the meeting to order. He is an older man named Frank. He reads the agenda. My hearing is 3rd. The first 2 items are a landscaping bid and a pool rule update. They take 40 minutes. I sit and wait. My girlfriend squeezes my hand. Finally, Frank calls my name. I walk to the front. Frank asks me to state my case. I open my binder. I start with the timeline. I explain that I parked in my assigned spot, that my decal was current, that I never received a new parking map, that I was towed without warning, that my portal access was revoked, that my records request was delayed, and that Betty has been harassing me with vendor visits and bogus fines. I show the photos, the receipts, the screenshots. I keep my voice calm. I stick to the facts. Betty interrupts. She says I am lying. She says the map was emailed. Frank tells her to wait her turn. I finish my statement. Frank asks if I have anything else. I say yes. I pull out a small diagram packet. I say I did not stop her because I wanted her on record. I pause. The room is silent. I explain that I requested the email distribution list in my records request. I say the HOA has not provided it yet, but I have something better. I explain that I work as an accountant and I know how to trace email logs. I contacted the management company's IT vendor using a public records request at the county level because the management company contracts with the county for tech support. The county provided me with a server log showing every email sent from the HOA address in the last 60 days. I drop it in a calm 2-sentence statement, then let the silence do the damage. I say the log shows no mass email about a parking map on the 15th of last month. I say the only parking-related email in that window was sent by Betty to the tow vendor on the morning of the day my car was towed, and it was sent after I parked, not before. Betty's face goes red. She says that is not possible. I hand Frank a printed copy of the time-stamped timeline packet. He reads it. His expression changes. He looks at Betty. She stands up and says I am twisting the facts. I ask her to explain the timestamp. She says the email system must have glitched. I ask if she has proof of the glitch. She does not answer. Frank asks Linda to pull the original email. Linda opens her laptop. She types. She frowns. She says there is no record of a mass email on the 15th. Betty says Linda must be looking in the wrong folder. Linda says she searched the entire archive. Frank asks Betty if she sent the email herself. Betty says she drafted it, but the secretary was supposed to send it. Frank asks where the secretary is. Betty says she is out of town. Frank asks if Betty has a copy of the draft. Betty says it is on her home computer. The room is silent. One of the other board members, a woman named Carol, asks Betty if she authorized the tow without board approval. Betty says the rules chair has discretionary authority. Carol says that authority requires notice to the resident. Betty says notice was given. I interrupt. I say I have the vendor work order from the tow company. I requested it through a public records request because the tow company is licensed by the state. I pull it from my binder. I say the work order was dated the same day as the tow and it lists Betty's personal cell phone as the contact, not the HOA office. Carol takes the work order from me. She reads it. She looks at Betty. She asks if Betty paid the tow vendor personally. Betty says the HOA has an account with them. Carol asks for the invoice. Betty says she does not have it with her. Carol says the board never approved a retainer with that vendor. Betty says it was approved last year. Carol says she has been on the board for 3 years and she never saw that vote. Frank asks Linda to check the financial records. Linda types again. She says there is no contract with that tow company in the system. Betty sits down. She says this is a witch hunt. Carol says this is a financial audit issue. Frank says the board needs to table this hearing and investigate the vendor relationship. Betty says she was trying to enforce the rules. Frank says the rules do not allow unilateral towing without notice. Betty says the map was notice. Frank says there is no evidence the map was distributed. I stay quiet. My girlfriend is filming on her phone. The neighbor is taking notes. Another resident in the back raises his hand. Frank calls on him. The resident says he never got a parking map either. Another resident agrees. A third resident says she got a map, but it was hand-delivered by Betty 2 days ago, not last month. Frank asks her to bring it to the next meeting. She says she will. Frank adjourns the hearing. He says the board will meet in executive session and issue a ruling within 7 days. He says my car hold will be lifted immediately. He hands me a signed authorization. I thank him. Betty does not look at me. I walk out with my girlfriend and my neighbor. The neighbor says that was unbelievable. My girlfriend says I nailed it. I say I just told the truth. We go to the tow yard. I hand them the authorization. The clerk releases my car. I pay an additional $50 for storage. I drive it home. It has a scratch on the bumper from the wheel lift. I take photos. I add them to my file. 2 days later, I get an email from the management company. It says the board voted to drop the case to avoid a public records mess. It says all fines related to the incident are waived. It says my portal access is restored. It says the HOA will reimburse me for towing and storage fees within 30 days. The next day, I get a second email. It says Betty Wilson has been removed from the rules interpretation chair position and her access to the portal admin tools has been revoked. It says the board is conducting a financial review of all vendor contracts she authorized. I forward both emails to Paul, the attorney. He replies, congratulations. He says if the reimbursement does not come through to call him. I thank him. 3 weeks later, I get a check from the HOA for $450. It covers the tow, the storage, the records request fee, and the bogus fines. I deposit it. The annual meeting happens in March. I attend. Betty is not there. Frank opens the meeting by announcing that the board conducted an audit and discovered that Betty had been approving vendor invoices without board votes for the last 18 months. He says the total amount was over $12,000. He says the board is pursuing restitution. He also announces that Betty is not current on her own dues and has been delinquent for 6 months. A resident asks what will happen to Betty. Frank says the board referred the matter to an attorney and the management company is handling collections. Carol adds that Betty resigned from the board last week. The room is quiet for a moment. Then someone in the back starts clapping. A few others join in. I do not clap. I just sit there and smile. After the meeting, a few neighbors come up to me. They thank me for standing up to Betty. One of them says Betty tried to fine him for a lawn edging violation last year, and he just paid it because he did not want the hassle. He says he wishes he had fought it. I tell him it is never too late to file a complaint. He nods. I go home and tell my girlfriend everything. She says I should write this down. I laugh. She says seriously, people need to know they can fight back. I tell her maybe I will. A week later, I get a call from Linda. She says the board approved a new parking policy. She says all assigned spaces will be clearly marked with numbers and all new maps will be mailed with delivery confirmation. She says the board also voted to eliminate the rules interpretation chair position and require board approval for all enforcement actions. I thank her. The next month, I list my house for sale. The disclosure package includes a letter from the management company confirming no outstanding fines or liens. The house sells in 2 weeks. The buyer is a retired couple from Ohio. They ask about the HOA. I tell them it is getting better. They ask what that means. I give them Paul's card and tell them to keep it just in case. They laugh. I do not. On moving day, I pack the last box and load it into the truck. My girlfriend asks if I am going to miss this place. I say no. She asks if I am glad I fought. I say yes. She asks if I would do it again. I think about it. I say I hope I never have to, but if I do, I will be ready. We drive away. In the rearview mirror, I see the Lakeview Crest Village Association sign. Under it, someone has spray painted a message. I cannot read it from this distance, but I can guess. I do not slow down. I keep driving. A month later, I get a letter from the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. It says they completed their investigation and found the HOA in violation of multiple statutes. It says the HOA was fined and ordered to implement new compliance training for the board. I file the letter with the rest of my documents. I do not need it anymore, but I keep it anyway, just in case. My girlfriend and I settle into our new place. It is a condo with no HOA. The building has a management company, but no board, no covenants, no Karen. The first night we sit on the balcony and she asks if I feel free. I tell her I feel lighter. She says that is close enough. Take care, and I will catch you in the next one.